Welcome to the interviews from the wasteland, everybody. Today we've got the man behind the screen, and we've got the brothers Krynn. The brothers Krynn, and the man behind the screen to discuss fantasy, science fiction, literature, film, and television, and other media.
Yep.
As it comes up. So, welcome here. We're happy to have you, and I'm sorry about the trouble that it took to get this whole thing started, but I'm glad that we have it working now. This is our first attempt to try and run a podcast on Twitter. So here we are trying to run a podcast.
Hopefully the first of many.
Hopefully. It actually is surprisingly accessible. So that's kind of its own.
The interesting, so the thing with mythic fiction or fantasy, as we were talking in the previous semi-recording, is that for almost 2 decades, because of a lot of the movie industry taking over the genre and Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, the genre was basically burnt to ashes, and it has been torn from the hands of traditional culture, because pop culture is not real culture. And the thing is, it was tainted with, and I hope you'll forgive me for using this phrase, American liberalism, so that ultimately the very traditional nature of the genre was, thrown away. Because this genre is
subverted, I think, is the word that we're going for in this.
Yeah, subverted. And this genre is traditionally something that Tolkien and Howard and Lord Dunsany and others built up. Even Walt Disney contributed in a positive way to it. And the thing is, this genre has its roots in like Brothers Grimm, Perrault, which has their roots in Arthuriana of the Middle Ages, and that has its roots in the ancient classics of like the Iliad and Gilgamesh and whatnot. So this is a very, very ancient genre, as I've ended up arguing with some people, and it's something which it's the total opposite of literary containment crap. Which the thing with the literary fiction stuff is that that's merely 200 years old, and almost every author of the literary, I'll say, genre, and I use the term loosely, has always been a manic depressed person. And some of them write better than others. I would argue Dostoevsky was very clumsy with a lot of his writing, but there's a lot of great philosophical notions in there. But most of it is dialogue, so you can just turn it into a theater play if you want to. It was always supposed to be kind of open like that. And the trouble with that is that this runs counter to the very descriptive, heavy on prose and heavy on poetry fantasy fiction, or mythic, because we have to encapsulate also the ancients. And the trouble is that now that they've rejected stuff like romantasy, and they've rejected also sword and sorcery a while back, this is thrusting it back towards the right, and this is allowing us to finally tear bit by bit the traditional culture from them, which is very important that we do so, because I'm not going to say like for just political reasons, because I don't do this because I want to do a fuck you to the left or something. It's that we, this is as Black Sun Archive has called it, this is a genre that's like a liturgy. It's kind of religious in nature in a lot of ways. So
that's
we need to, because
Black Knight that's to be expected. I mean, when you get right down to what is the ultimate source of all fantasy fiction? Well, it's world myth. What makes up world myth? World religion.
Yeah. And
I feel like Tolkien really exemplified the modern genre in that doing the world building as background for the myth is very different from the way fiction existed prior to Tolkien, prior to that sort of world building background. The first science fiction novel, as I understand it, was actually a Roman travel log that was written by a guy who got sick and tired of Romans making random shit up in their travel logs. So he wrote a travel log about traveling to the... It's fascinating. And he's mostly just like talking mad trash against other at the time like authors because they would just make shit up in their travel logs. He's like, all right, well, I went to the moon once. Here's my travel log.
The first science fiction was a diss track against Rome.
Yes, was a diss track against like decayed literature in Rome. But I think that Tolkien really exemplified like the fantasy genre because he changed it fundamentally because of the world building that he did. As prior to that, the world building was always fundamentally attached to existing myths and existing peoples and cultures. in the mythic, and that's where I'd argue is the distinction between the mythic and the fantasy genre, where the mythic genre is attached to real people, places, and cultures, even if highly stylized or modified or adjusted for the needs of the story, whereas the fantasy genre creates its own mythic world building and then operates within the purview of that specific rule set.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is a genre that is supposed to be devoid of politics because it's, like you said, basically theological in nature, and it's also supposed to be very intellectual because you have to design all the flora, fauna, all the architecture, all the history, all the stuff. You have to design everything, and this makes the trouble with that is that there's no room really for the anti-intellectualism of globalism and of like Game of Thrones or Harry Potter and whatnot. Now, not to say that like some of the world building in Game of Thrones was obviously pretty good, but the trouble is there's a lot of it that's really bad. And the thing is, it is ultimately anti-intellectual because it's postmodernist. Whereas, this is something that's supposed to be very traditional. And I'd even argue you can't even make it pagan at this point because it's pretty much a Christian genre. And it's supposed to be. Because
if you make it pagan, what you end up with is more of the like historic Greek myths is what it ends up looking.
But what I mean is that there's always a moral.
I was going to say,
there's always a moral element.
You end up with the historic Greek myths, or you end up basically creating the poetic Edda.
Yeah. You're right, though. There is always a moral center to good and mythic literature. I mean, that's in many ways what the Iliad is about. The Iliad isn't about the Trojan War. It just happens during the Trojan. The Iliad is about like morality, and war and the morality of men in war, which is very different.
And in a lot of ways, the Iliad is also something like I'm going to say it has a bit of an anti-war message because it's like a funerary dirge for like Achilles and Hector, basically, almost bemoaning the fact that they had to fight and die. It just strikes me as something very melancholic in that regard. And
as a quick side note on this, shout out Mary A. that's been posting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
she's
absolutely incredible. But yeah, I mean, I get that same sense from it too. The Iliad does not revel in the conflicts. It presents them as bloody, horrible things. You don't want to be in. You don't want to be named in those. You are dying. Your corpse is being looted and desecrated. The gods themselves are contesting with each other. For me, one of the things that I think is the most fascinating about the Iliad, I think back to, obviously we covered it when I was in, I need to actually go back and properly read Odyssey and all these things, which I have plans this year, but I haven't read them since high school. But, you cover them in school, you get basically the Cliff Notes ideas of what are going into grand sagas, but particularly thanks to Mary's coverage of an exploration of the ideas in it. One of the things that stood out to me is that I remember learning in school how much of, pardon the language, of shit Zeus is. The Iliad turns that completely on its head. He's the one constantly he's the one who's constantly standing in the middle, telling his kids, you guys got to stop this. You got to stop fighting. You got to stop picking sides in this conflict. Isn't for us to interfere with. Cut this out.
Yeah.
Stop it. You never hear about the fact that progenitor deities were fathers first and foremost. Loving father. Yeah, he did some messed up shit, but he loves his kids. He hates kids fight. He hates.
I think that's fundamentally something that's been lost in modernized fantasy, especially like Game of Thrones, because they want to. The left, and see, this is when I'm getting off into politics. You gotta watch out for that because I'll do it. But the way that modern fantasy demythologizes itself in a goal to be, quote, realistic, has produced a really large gap in what is currently available in terms of fantasy fiction, because you got your Brandon Sanderson type shit, which in my opinion is like paint by numbers for fantasy. He's a prolific and skilled author. All right. And if I want to do
the MCU,
if I want to do a paint by numbers fantasy book, I do his math because it's consistent. That is like the standard for how it's done, and I don't like it. I never liked it.
Yeah.
Although I'll just push
modern fantasy to me feels like sci-fi wearing fantasy.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'll just push back a little on the Zeus thing. Now, he is a loving father in the Iliad, but there are plenty of myths where he's kind of a shit dad. Yeah, interestingly, I remember reading all the myths as a kid, and I remember going, and then all the Norse ones, and I went, wow, Zeus is like the guy I don't want to have as a dad, but Odin's the one you want to have as a dad. And I remember,
in some ways,
but in the Iliad,
stuff too.
Yeah, well, in the Iliad, Zeus is actually really in the right. But that being said, when it comes to demythologizing fantasy, it's part of what's so interesting is because, like, I've been dealing with some editors, and a lot of them, when I've submitted the Olympnomachi to them, which is basically my attempt at writing a follow-up myth to the Greek myths, so that it starts to bridge into the Roman, into a kind of, I'm inventing Roman myths. And the problem is, a lot of these people, like when I've explained, well, see, they're like, well, you don't have a designated main character. This seems like a weird narrative. This is terrible. Who would even write in this manner? Why didn't you choose a starting point? And I said, there is a starting point. Well, Milanoe doesn't work as a starting point. And, trying to explain to them, well, see, the style is that of, the Silmarillion, and also earlier kind of Greco-Nordic epics and whatnot, like the Prose Edda and the Iliad and the Aeneid and the Odyssey. Like, I'm basically following very closely, traditional storytelling styles and methods and whatnot. And I get told, why don't you just, no, this isn't good. Like, and I asked them, okay, have you read the Silmarillion and all that stuff? Why would I? And it's like, you agreed to edit something like that. Why are you asked? Why wouldn't you have read? You know what I mean? The Silmarillion. Yeah. And it's something where I wonder if it's not just a genre that's been demythologized, but even the editors and a lot of people who are involved in the genre who have been demythologized in a way. And it's really quite confusing. And yet what I've also found very strange is that there's so many who there's a lot of them that when they come into the genre as editors or as publishers or as what have you, if you tell them now, this genre needs to be very traditional and whatnot, they go, yeah, but that's not what readers want. And it's like, well, that's maybe not what you think the readers want. But when you come into fantasy, it's like what everyone really wants is Tolkien and Howard. And this is where, and you can either, how do I put it, fly as close to their mountains as possible, or you can, try to chart your own course and go crash into the ground, in the valley. And I say crash because, like, if you demythologize, you've stripped bare, you know what I mean? Like, this entire genre. But going forward, what I think is so charming and reassuring, that at least for me, it's that because I've posted quite a few stories on Patreon now, on Royal Road, and on Substack, and I've been getting a bit of a following in these places, is that, people want this sort of story. And like, the more traditional I swing, like, and even Dave swings, the more I've noticed we get comments, we get encouragement. Like, Olympnomachi has gotten way more views and comments and replies and critiques out of all my stories, out of basically everything. And even on Royal Road, I'm gathering more of a following for that than almost any other story except Varcola. And Varcola is basically a Bram Stoker style fantasy horror story in that it's journal entries and letters. So it's just, I think a bit of the, it's almost systemic, like, but as the genre is peeling like a snake's skin, the modernity itself, and going back to Tolkien, I'm noticing more and more editors dropping out of the fantasy race because they're like, these new authors, they're not following the patterns of the past 30 years. Mm-hmm. And
they don't adhere.
And it's also running
ahead format.
Yeah. And it's like, well, we're also running headlong into like literary authors who are saying, well, you guys are insipid. You guys are, you guys are you're wrecking literature.
That note made me laugh so hard.
All right, I missed this. What was it?
Yeah.
There was a note about a gal posted talking about how Philip K. Dick and Tolkien are just among the most insipid authors ever read.
No, Philip Day King is perfect, or not perfect, but he's like the height of this sort of literature, right. And Tolkien's
she was holding. I'll say this even as somebody who does like Philip Dick's writing, but him up on a pedestal so damn high that, I mean, he'd be standing in the stratosphere suffocating with how high he was. My God. But yeah, no, she had the gall to call people like Tolkien insipid flavor. Really?
Really?
Like, yeah.
Wow.
Like, are you mad? Tolkien is literally a language professor who created entire mythology.
Well, here's my theory. All right, I have a theory about this. I remember I took a creative writing class years ago, and there were all these kids who majored in creative writing. I was sitting over there in a very like hands-on hard science sort of thing. And I remember sitting in that class. I'm like, cool. So you guys all want to be writers? And they're like, you know, this is what we're studying. I'm like, great. How many of the legendary authors in history have ever studied creative writing?
None.
They sort of looked around and got kind of sheepish about it. I'm like, just interesting. Something you guys should keep in mind. If you want to be a good writer, you got to study something else.
Yeah. Let me put it this way, because I am one of those kids who studied creative writing. I've talked about this on my Substack.
I'm giving you a hard time about it then. Go ahead.
I also studied 4 other major same time.
There you go.
So, you know, geology, German, English for the creative writing. I studied briefly, majored in psychology, and also video game.
Wow.
You know, very wildly different things. And I ended up getting a degree in none of them. Because I got fucked over by my college, but that's a whole different thing.
Fuck.
Of course they fucked you over. That's their business.
That's sort of what university.
Like they're supposed to fuck you over.
Yeah. Well, to make a very long story short, I had to go to a different certificate in design, and when I went back, my original school decided, well, you're continuing education now, so you get the bottom of the list. Oh, and we changed the requirements to get the degree. You have to do all these intro level stuff that first years are doing. Good luck getting into those classes. At that point, I just threw my hands up and said, all right, whatever. I'm just not going to.
Damn.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I went for English Lit because I thought, I had my head full of Joseph Campbell, and I said, oh yeah, I'm going to study under professors like him. I'm going to be having these great debates on literature and on mythology, and I'm going to study that in history because I was passionate about history. I get there and they want to talk about sex, the misogyny of Sherlock Holmes, and what kind of sexual position or something or fetishes do princesses and fairy stories characters have. And I was just going, why would I? No, I don't want to talk about that. How about mythology and, comparative lit stuff and the universal unconscious? And they just kind of said, what the hell are you talking about? I had a few professors like, I have no idea what you're even talking about. Are you sure you're talking about English, like English lit and whatnot? And I'm going, wait, hold on, what? And it was a shit show. But the history department was a lot better. At least they were studying history. And well, most of them were. Some of them were just inventing stuff and talking about colonialism and nonsense like that. And now I'm and then I went on to and then I went on to study English, education as a second language in order to teach that. And now I'm stepping into French education and whatnot, because why not get an extra? Well, I just want to make sure I have my grammar down pat and whatnot. Since I can't find a French editor, I'll just turn myself into a French editor and also take a bit of education on the side. And if I can, marketing, so I can teach French and history over in France. And all I need is a certificate for that. And just if I can get marketing as well for fun, I'll have a bit more knowledge. But ironically, I've considered also going for languages like Gaelic and German and whatnot, and turning the French side of things not into a French major, but a philology thing. Because why not go down kind of Tolkien's path, but a different route? Rather than the English and Finnish languages, why not focus more on the French and Gaelic languages? I think because that seems to be the focus of my story.
So regarding the way in which these genres are going to be shifting over time, and this is something I wanted to bring up, because you're talking about going down a French route with sort of a Tolkienish ideas and mythologies. I think that there's a space right now because there's a couple of books I want because I've always right. And I'm 66,000 words into a early novel that but
Nice.
I think there's
Cool.
I'm planning to get 90,000 and then make up about another 30,000 interlude stuff between chapters. But I think there's a space right now for a combination of science fiction and fantasy into sort of a mythic holistic genre. An example of like an early version of this. Did you guys see the new quote unquote 2004, 2006 Battlestar Galactica series? Either of you?
I saw
No,
parts of it. I saw. I didn't see the full thing, but I did see parts of it, so I do have an idea of what you're saying.
Yeah. It seems like an early version of a combined science fiction, fantasy, mythic genre. It's really weird when you watch it. A lot of people ran into the same issues, which is right around the end of season 2. It gives you whiplash because it seems to shift genres all of a sudden with a bunch of nonsense that you don't understand. And the reason is because you thought it was a science fiction series this whole time for the first 2 seasons, and it never was. It's always been like a mythic series, like a Gilgamesh style television series. And it just doesn't become obvious until the end of season 2 that they're not really telling what they're talking about in the context of the television show is much less science fiction and much more like the Odyssey. And if you look at it from that perspective, it all makes sense. There's no weird whiplash at you, but you kind of have to know what you're doing, and nobody did when it first came. And I think that there's going to be a space for that sort of resurgence of the classically mythic as a genre in the face of high technology like you would see in near future science, where you effectively have recreated, conceptualized, an abstracted form of these pagan gods, and then you can combine those with an actual Christian ethos, the way Tolkien kind of did, to build something new. I'm still not really sure what that's going to end up looking like, but I've got two or three books that are floating around in the back of my that would be probably within that genre. Something like a modernized form of a more of a mythic Lord of the Rings, only it takes place in like Arkansas. I'm reading the reason I'm thinking about this is because I'm reading right now A Canticle for Leibowitz, if you've ever heard of that book. It's
no.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay, so it's a relatively famous post-apocalyptic. It's not mythic exactly, but it's not exactly science fiction either. It takes place in theory between 600 and 1200 years after a nuclear war that took place in the 1970s. And it's from the perspective of an abbey in like Utah or northern Arizona. And what they do in that abbey is they store and preserve old books. And they were founded as like the Order of Leibowitz, who is this saint or this martyr who founded this abbey trying to smuggle books across the country after the nuclear war and public perception turned against literacy and the wizard kings that destroyed the world, as one could see happening pretty realistically. And so one of the things that it talks about that I really want to discuss, I will be writing a Substack a review of this book, but it talks, at the time I'd presume that it would be interpreted in the 60s as, look at these silly religious people and how they're superstitious about things they do not understand. But in the context of the modern day, it has a very different sort of interpretation where you're talking about, look at these individuals who are willing and able through faith to dedicate their lives to preserving information. And I would really like to see sort of, again, I discuss it briefly, but a Lord of the Rings style of book that takes place in like trailer parks in the United States, where you've got people trying to run like a microchip or something like that from Louisiana up to Seattle, and there's like a motorcycle gang on their ass and shit like that. Like I could see that genre appearing and relying heavily on the presence of like artificial intelligences, Christian iconography, and a very mythic perspective as to like the way the characters engage with the world around them. as an emergent genre from all the social instability that we're seeing now. All right, proceed. I'm done.
It's definitely
I can see that
definitely
happening.
a fascinating idea. That would
Yeah.
be wonderful.
And
It's actually kind of funny.
I might.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I may say so, I think it's too original for me to ever try.
Well, the funny thing is, funny enough, on that same vein, my wife was actually a story that reminds me a lot of this premise you were talking about. It was not of the same scope. It was going to be a simple book, but it was very much sort of almost an Exodus style story, primarily focusing on one guy and a post-apocalypse kind of situation, world wiped out by nuclear. And it's kind of focusing on a single guy in remnants of the world who, along the way, finds a girl whose family is butchered by marauders, survived by hiding. So it's got the found family thing, all that sort of thing going on, society trying to rebuild itself from the ruins of before. And she was going to go deep on a lot of the difficulties going on with that. She hasn't worked on that book in a long time. She keeps talking about wanting to go back to it, but it's just one of those kind of concepts that, like, the types of ideas she was wanting to work with. They're challenging to work with. It takes time. It takes knowledge. It takes a lot of practice. Properly work with sorts of ideas, really flesh them out, really make them resonate and feel real, and give that sense of grandness without feeling like kind of cheap trappings. Considering another story that sort of tries, I would argue, kind of tries something similar. Like, I would argue Neon Genesis Evangelion tries something similar.
Yeah, that's a good description. That's also a good description. I agree. It also kind of fails at it.
Yeah, well, and it's because, like, for as much as Hideaki Anno loves the visuals and the religious trappings and all that stuff, he doesn't really understand. And it's like, as a piece of Japanese media for the Japanese culture, I understand why it is so beloved. I also understand why it's beloved as a staple piece of anime. There was really nothing else like it at the time.
Have you ever seen Gurren Lagann?
I watched a couple episodes of it, but I honestly could not get into it.
Okay. You won't get into it until you hit episode 14, at which point, I think it's like 14 or 16, at which point all of it makes sense in retrospect, and it becomes extremely good.
Okay, well, I will give it another shot then.
Okay. I love that. I should do a review of that one too. Anyway, go ahead. Evangelion.
But I mean, I basically said what I was trying to say about that. It came down to the fact that, what worked really well, and a lot of stuff that didn't worked because the person behind it didn't understand working with. And
I think one of the big limiters,
Frank, I feel that's true with a lot of Anno's work.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the big limiters to writing decent modern fiction right now, or in the near future, is because the cultural and technological environment is moving so fast that by the time you finish a work, it's outdated. 2 years ago, we didn't have AI, and now it's been integrated into every aspect of people's lives. That is crazy. All right. There's absolutely no way to write like in the present, which is, I think, why a lot of even like the modern writing tends to be a throwback to like the pre-20 era of cultural standardization, because we don't have a standard right now. Things are just moving too fast.
Things are moving too fast, and they are moving separate from one another for anything conglomerate into a standard proper culture. And hopefully that will change. And hopefully it will change for the better.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that what's happening is now I'm a school teacher, so I tend to see, and I interact mostly with Japanese and French students. Like, I'll be in Japan 1 year, then, and then Quebec, and now going to France. But I think that you're absolutely right. Things are moving, as you said, Dave, so that, you can't get a proper pop culture anymore, like a mainstream culture. I do think there's at least with Japan, France, and I'm in contact with some teachers who are in Vietnam, China, one in Korea and whatnot. I like to keep in touch with such people, and even one in Spain and a few people in Finland. And what I've noticed is that what they tell me is that a lot of the students are reverting to older books and whatnot, as they can't keep up with a lot of the AI stuff. So what's happening is that you have and this is something I think Copernican, you predicted a while back, people are kind of reverting to like a more traditional form of culture. So that, like, the French are turning to a Nordic Frankish kind of style. The Japanese, it seems to me, like I'm noticing a lot of French books. I notice a lot of French books and questions about France and French language and ideas. And I notice there's more French jobs than English jobs nowadays in Japan. So you have almost that kind of mingling with Genji and Yoshikawa and other traditional Japanese authors and whatnot. So you have, and of course in China, their older literature like Journey to the West, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and with and over in Spain, it's it's not just Don Quixote, but it's like Tolkien, it's French literature like Alex Dumas, who are really popular. So you have almost like everybody's kind of like, nobody can keep up. So we're reverting back to what's old, to a pre-2010 thing, because technology is moving too fast. Everybody's got whiplash. And as an author, I'll admit, things are like, there's so much stuff coming out so quick. And I'm finding I write slow, very slow in comparison to everyone else in terms of my books. So it's...
Yeah, but you also write 5 books at the same time. Let's be fair here.
Yeah, fair. But the thing is, what I've noticed is that with my own books, I'm writing slow, but I've given up on trying to write in a way that like might appeal to the what's hip and whatnot. So I just revert more and more to a Mark Twainian, Tolkienian style, because it's just, I can't keep up. And it makes life so much simpler when you just give up on keeping up.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was one of the ways, kind of throwing back to talk about me being in many creative writing classes. When I was in college, that was one of the ways that people realized that I immediately was not with the regular crowd. Even back then, and I'm talking, back like 2006, 2007, I was already looking to self-publish well before I even considered the possibility of going to a publisher. I never liked the idea of going to a publisher. It always, even back then, I could see the problem that we came to today kind of on the horizon with that. I recognize that the work I like, what I write, these people, they won't be interested.
Yeah.
Closest I could get would be to convince Wizards of the Coast to let me write a Forgotten Realms, and even then, that would not be what I wanted. So,
no, of course not.
Do it myself.
You're too talented for that.
Wizards can go to hell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pardon my.
Well, I'll just add to what you said, Dave. I did not see the painting on the wall. Because I figured, why not aspire after the trad pubs and whatnot and try to work my way up. I didn't see the painting on the wall. I didn't see woke and as even a factor or even a thing until probably like around 2014, almost verging on 15. And my brother had warned me of it. And for months, I was like, no, that's like, nobody's that retarded. And then, you arrive around the end of 2014 and I went, oh, wow, they are. Okay, neat.
He was right.
Yeah. And it's just, Dan is much more attuned to to fads and whatnot. He's much more aware and perceptive of these things than I am. But by the time of like 2022 or 2023, that's when I gave up. And I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be pretty damn impossible. I'm too French, too white, and just too Catholic for this. And I just think the other problem is that the old dead pub, as I'm now calling it, is just wholly incapable of course correcting. And that's the thing. They talk about it's too big to fail. No, it's too big to even move or maneuver, like a elephant in a china shop. It can't move anywhere without breaking or anything. And, considering the left's hold over culture, what they're also doing is the Roman Empire thing of chopping up bits of territory and forking it over and saying, all right, I can't protect this region. I can't keep it. I'll chop it up and throw it away. So which is basically what Rome did with its territories, selling it off to barbarians. For example, Romanticy recently was just chopped up and thrown away because the left is like, well, we can't keep this. It's degenerate and nobody wants to buy it as much. It's not appealing to women anymore. We're throwing it away. Well, we now have an opportunity for people like Thérèse Judena, Catherine Elaine, if she ever wants to, and others, of just grabbing it and saying, all right, thank you. Now it's right wing and we're going to sacralize it. We're going to turn it right wing and traditional and monarchist and true love and all that crap. And, then, all right, we already have sword and sorcery. Now let's move to epic fantasy. Let's move to Portal Quest or something. But Portal Quest will be where the hardest battle is to be fought because through isekai, the left has a stranglehold because isekai is it's entirely stupid, retarded, and degenerate. And the real challenge will be restoring Portal Quest to like being something like Narnia. That's going to be the real challenge. And I will admit, I have no idea how that's going to get done. It'll take a really good author, like another Lewis or something, to tear it free and make it cool again, I guess is what I'd like to say. And I know that there's some there's quite a few people on Substack who've said, no, Tolkien and fantasy and whatnot is not supposed to be cool, like in the modern parlance. And I know that, but we don't have another word for it. So what do they prefer? Splendid, like the Victorians would?
Banger.
Yeah.
Banger. Okay, we'll go with that one.
Let's see. How would this Gen Alpha phrase is something like 420 no cap for real on God?
Yep, there you go.
What?
My soul died saying that. Exactly. Yeah. What?
What he said.
To be fair, I think
it's bussin', yo.
Yeah, it's bussin'. I think the Zoom are gonna have a really hard reading long-form novels, just in general. I think that it's like disastrously dangerous how hard of a time they're going to have.
So, I mean, I can actually give a bit of extra insight into. I mean, I don't work like that. I run a paints, but I'm also a 38-year-old guy who's been trying to have kids and hasn't had any of that. So I got some free time. I've made friends with a lot of Zoomers, playing games online, talking to people online, getting to know people, including quite a lot of Zoomers who are aspiring writers themselves. Many of them are very talented, surprising given.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
Come out of their generation. One thing that I have heard multiple times is how much they struggle with reading anything lengthier than a 200 or 200-page book. Like, I hear it all the time, even from the ones who aspire to write, have a good grasp of language, a good skill with painting with words, is, the flowery language phrase it. And yet a lot of these people, these young people, they're not well read up on things like The Lord, they're well read up on the Chronicles of Narnia. They're not even that well read up on shorter fiction like Howard, Fritz Leiber, any of the other pulp authors, Moorcock. And to me, that all kind of throws back to the librarian of Salino talked about a while ago, the wake. My cat is chewing my books.
You should get a chinchilla. They love to consume literature.
I do actually have a hamster here too.
Oh.
But as I was saying, they struggle with reading longer form stuff, and even a lot of the shorter form stuff I've been finding, it seems to be like because they don't really so much know that it is. But in either case, it throws back to the librarian of talked about in the wake. I think it was Yakubian 8 posted one of his essays talking about the Critical Drink little short film that he did about his spy thriller character, Jack Ryan. And one of the standout point for me that librarian made is why did Drinker's movie end up feeling like so much of the stuff he complains about? Because he doesn't know the stuff that's older. He doesn't know the stuff that led to it. He doesn't know the class. He doesn't understand the roots that these draw from. And so he imitates, he knows. And I see that a lot. Yeah.
That's true.
And that's the problem you see with a lot of the generation. Gen Alpha are repeating a lot they know, which isn't to say that, the kids aren't all right. From what I've seen, the kids are more all right than a lot of people would like you to think they are. Surprisingly, Gen Alpha, in spite of the slang. I'll tell you, one of the things I've noticed from few Gen Alpha kids met, they can spot the AI slop so much faster. They know it within a couple sentences. AI, they haven't. Lisa Kuznak, actually, a few days ago with her child, her little girl was reading something, and within a few sentences was like, oh, this is AI, and moved to something else. And her mom was like, I couldn't even tell. Very different kinds of strengths sort of forming from these younger generations, but when it comes to the issue we're at hand here that we're talking about, writing literature to last, that resonate generations, eons potentially, you have to go back. You have to understand where it started and where it came from. Otherwise, it's going to be stuck in the now, and the now is decidedly temporary.
Yeah.
I think that, like, Brandon Sanderson is really guilty of that. I'm going to keep bringing him because I really don't like him, but he's definitely guilty of writing material that is highly forgettable once the audience.
Well, yeah,
I haven't read much of his work, but I've gotten that same feeling from what little I have read.
I remember people recommending him several times, And I was almost tempted once or twice, but I just would look at the summary and I just felt bored. I didn't want to pick it up. And they'd say, well, why don't you? Yeah. And it was like, well, why don't, like I had one person who asked, why would you pick up the Kull the Conqueror movie novelization and not Brandon Sanderson? And I said, the Kull novel looks cool to me because I love the movie. And it's like, just because it looks neat or there's a feel to it you really liked. Yeah, just because of that. Because I could crank on the that very metal theme that sounds like Riders of Doom from the Kull movie. I could crank that up, start reading the book, and I could just kick back and enjoy myself. Then again, I'll just throw that song on when I'm reading the Nibelungenlied anyway. So, which I have a new edition of. So I'm currently, I've started reading that, even though I'm also reading Comte de Monte Cristo and Roland and the Bible all at the same time. And I'm also reading a bunch of other stuff like the Kings of Great Britain for the first time. And for a book of, well, 2 books. And I want to go back to reading some historic records about the Irish colonization of Wales and the west coast of Scotland. But like, you know, just reading that stuff is way more interesting than anything that a lot of authors of the modern day can put out. But I will admit that like a lot of the authors on Substack offer so much stuff that it's like I can't keep up with a lot of it. So I'm reading very slowly and putting up commentaries very slowly. Yeah.
My struggle.
And
I told you a couple weeks ago I was going to because I got Crown of Blood. I told you a couple weeks ago I'm going to crack that open and get started. I'm sorry to say that I still haven't. It's still sitting there unopened.
Hey, I keep forgetting about you having promised that. So like, because I'm, like I promised to read what is it, Last Daughter of Wolves by Catherine. I've got it right here. I've made it to the second page, and it's just like I said, it's just I know of 2 other people who've promised. Don't worry, Joe. I'm going to read Crown of Blood, and then the weeks go by. I'm focusing on homework or on reading stuff I like or working on the next essay, and then I get one message the other day. Oh, I'm so sorry, I haven't opened it. You promised to read it? Yeah. I think it was like no or something, and I'm like, you did? I don't recall that. Yeah, I did. Just scroll up in the chat. So I scroll up in the chat. Oh my gosh! I guess you did.
Yeah, watch out for that.
And he's like, and I think one of them said, you have the memory of a goldfish, but then you make reference to how you remember watching Lion King at 2 years old. You either have you're either Dory the Explorer or Dora the Explorer from Finding Nemo, or you're like, you have the most eidetic memory. I don't know which it is. And I go, I don't know.
But the answer to that question is
yes.
At the same time.
yeah, it is. And of course, I've also got 2 book clubs, one of the Silmarillion, one of Lord of the Rings that I'm also part of. So I'm having to reread those, and every time I do, I'm basically almost crying because I'm so happy. It's just, but that's the thing. Like a lot of Gen Zoomers, they're either reading voraciously at such a pace that it startles me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember being like that in my 20s. Damn, you kids are making me proud. Or they can't really read, as you said, Dave. And those ones, I see a lot of them like they want to, but there's a block. And I noticed the same thing with a lot of Gen Xers that I knew back in the day, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is tragic. I don't know,
a shocking amount of overlap.
Yeah, and then you have. Now, this is also another reason why I'll actually go on record and say I do like the company of a lot of baby boomers, because a lot of them are very well read. Well, when I say baby boomers, I mean a lot of them that I've met in Japan, Canada, and France, because they were just, it's very different than like a lot of Anglo boomers, although there are a lot of good, positive Anglo boomers. You can't paint with a broad brush. Well, Dave can because he's got a paint shop, but the rest of us can't. Actually, I'm very
that 5.5-inch Stainer block brush here.
All right. Actually, I love that you own a paint shop. It's freaking cool. But as for my students,
I'm close enough.
Oh, okay, you manage it. It's still freaking cool, bro. I wish I could manage such a shop. But the thing with Gen Alpha that I'm finding is that what I find so fascinating when I was in Japan, like I could never, like I'd see them whipping out in the middle of class a book or like scrolling through their phone, and I'd say, no, phone down. I need you to put the Kindle away. And I remember one of them would even huff irritably at me and glare at me, and I'd be like, what was her name? It's like, you're putting it down, and you'll read at the end of class. So you give the lesson, and at the end of class, everybody was supposed to get like 15 to 20 minutes of reading time. So of course the kids scramble and push each other, and I actually had like one girl even shove a boy almost into the hallway because she's wanting to get to the books first, and because we had class books on the side. And when I went to teach in Quebec for the first time, it's like, all right, who here likes to read? And out of 24 kids, almost per every class, 20 hands would go up. 4 would hate it. The rest would love it. And I'd let them read at the beginning of class. On the advice of another teacher, said you have to. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of kids with a lot of energy who are angry because all language classes start with reading. So, okay. Then at the end of class, you have to read as the teacher. You have to pull out, like a book, and you have to read to them because they want you to read to them like an audiobook. So, of course, almost every class goes like this, and they're all addicted to books. And I had one class that complained, how come we're not, can we talk about books? Okay. What kind of books do you want to talk about? They wanted to talk about the Protos and Poetic Edda. And they had a big argument about and they had a big argument about who's cooler, Freya, Odin, or Thor, because they're all the warrior gods. I think it was Thor or Odin who came out on top. And I joked with him, do you mean Marvel Thor or actual Thor? Oh my gosh, I had a few kids actually getting annoyed with me and complaining, like, don't you even read? And I'm like, yeah, of course, I was poking fun at you kids. But they're like, it's not until I mentioned some of the older myths that they went, oh, so you did read this, freaking kids. But yeah, like the problem is a few of them, like the principal told me you can't, like the class is English. You're not supposed to, don't spend too much time on the Protos Edda. You can do that a little at the end, but don't go doing that for, I know.
What kind of kind of school teaches like this? Because in American schools, they'll just like, the teachers will shit the bed and then throw the students out of class. Like,
yep.
This was English as a second language, but I was given a lot of leeway, and until I wasn't, and that was towards the end of the contract. At which point it's like, do you want to leave? Frick yeah, because you're kind of you're micromanaging me. You're yelling at me every once in a while, and I really conflicted with one of the principals because I was teaching at 2 schools and I was running between them. And the trouble was I had problems with one, but the other one was great. But the Norse mythology thing was just the students who insisted and pushed. And the idea was, bring in more books, bring in more stuff like that, discuss the books they're reading and enjoying and the audiobooks they're listening to with their parents. But there was a limit. Like, you're not allowed to bring in like Game of Thrones or Pillars of the Earth into this classroom because obviously, and you need to keep it constrained. No Silmarillion because, like at least one of the principals knew about it and was like, that's too violent.
That's too violent?
Keep it to, well, the Silmarillion does have a lot of character deaths. You have people getting chopped up piece by piece, stuff like that.
Only occasionally.
Yeah. But I was given a lot of leeway.
Well, I guess that raises the question: how old on average are these?
They were between 5 and 12 years old.
Okay, then they're maybe a little.
Yeah,
if they're going as low as 5, maybe a little too.
Yeah, but I did have a 4th graders complain that, well, you mentioned you like Conan. How come you're not talking about Conan? And I said, I'm not trying to get fired here. I don't know how well, like these are female principals. They don't like that sort of stuff.
They don't like. They don't like good books. They're women.
Yeah, they don't. And it was just like, no, kid, I'm not trying to get fired here. I'm trying to. I want to get paid this month. And you got the kid just not getting it. But but of course the young girls were interested in whatever the boys were pushing forward, and that was a learning experience. Yeah. In Japan, though, a lot of the girls were pushing for their own interests. But in Quebec, they were just saying, well, we like what the boys like. Very different.
So that is one of the fundamental flaws of feminists, that it encourages the girls to like try and be girl bosses and do the man thing better than them. And right now, the man thing is right-wing extremism.
Yeah. Well, the girls were asking, like I was told by a principal in one class, you have to ask the girls what they want first, or like to discuss today at the end of the end of class discussion or something before the boys. Okay, so I asked the girls and they say, well, what do the boys want? And then it's like, okay, I asked the boys and they say, well, we want this. And then the girls decide, well, what the boys want is always cooler than what we want. And then they just latch onto that. and they worded it that, and it was like, and I was told, how come you didn't scold the girl for saying what the boys want is always better? Well, I'm not gonna. You told me I can't scold the girl for being herself. So which is it? Do I scold her for being herself, or do I you know what I mean? Do I encourage?
No, it's okay for her to be herself as long as herself is what we want it to.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And then I was told I was being a smart ass.
Must fit in prescribed box. She spills out of that box. Your job is to put her back.
Yeah, and but this girl was very headstrong. She was like the leader of the girls in that class, and all the girls would look to her, and she'd look to the boys next to her, and the boys next to her just wanted whatever they wanted, and so there was a weird dynamic, and it was fun. But yeah, but a lot of them did like fantasy fiction, so we got a lot of discussions like that. So I didn't get to play video games with the Zoomers, but I got to mingle with Gen Alpha and or maybe the generation after that, and just find they're irrepressible little scamps. So, and I'm looking forward to that sort of position in France because, well,
they're not.
It's just
one thing I have noticed is that Zoomer guys just do not give a fuck about any of this ideological bullshit are expected to put up with through their scholastic careers.
Yeah.
They just do not care.
No, they don't.
Let me put it this way. One of my best friends from Mexico, he doesn't give a fuck. I have seen him face to face tear down the argument people as they're trying to make them to him, as they're trying to argue about how he is oppressed. He's telling them you don't know what you're talking about. I literally went to some of these quote unquote protests you're talking about when I was a kid and got my face beaten in by the police. I've lived this stuff. You don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, but I've even noticed Zoomer women are divided between either buying into the Kool-Aid or just really not giving a fuck and just veering towards extreme femininity. It's Gen Z is a little bipolar in terms of not to say it's just the reaction, but they're very, very, I'd say, an angry generation because they've been Gen Y has been steadily screwed after 2008. Gen Z never had a chance.
Yeah, they never got to see the world not be a shit.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think millennials like us, well, at least like myself, we got that period of time where we got to see the world not be ass. And that's part of what instilled in us that insufferable need to be like, well, we're going to save the world.
Yeah, in the worst way possible. Zoomers are like, it's borked.
It's like, well, it's done. It's over.
Yeah, and I remember growing up in what was essentially a Franco-Irish ghetto as a kid, and I remember just growing up. It's like, well, you have no money, and at one point, even growing up in the woods, and it's like you got no money, you got almost no house. Life's good. It's like this is good. This is the life. You don't need anything except a dog, books, and plenty of mountains to climb. But the problem is, after 2008, it's just everything's shit. And we do have a lot of Gen Yers who are like, I'm going to save the world, as you put it, Dave. But then as every year has been passing, more and more Gen Yers are like, well, this is shit. This is borked. And now you have Gen Z from the beginning. Yeah. It's like, yeah. But I think that this falls into why, now there's been some polls done, and apparently this is why fantasy is getting to be very popular with the younger generation. And I think it has to do with the fact that, like with Tolkien, it's like, and even Howard, it's about a post-collapse world in a way. Like the situation with the Hyborian kingdoms and with Gondor and Arnor is like total collapse. It's total shit. Like contrary to what a lot of Tolkien tubers might say, Denethor is a shitty ass ruler, even in the book.
Oh yeah,
he's shit.
I mean, he's not as bad as like a Biden. Yeah,
yeah, and the thing is,
that's a pretty low bar to step over.
Well, I feel like Theoden and Biden are very analogous to one another.
But Theoden pulls through.
Yeah, that's the difference.
And he makes Rohan great again, and even Gondor by extension because he's that awesome. But the thing is, I think the Zoomers I've met who like, most of them I've met who like fiction and can read and whatnot, are drawn to fantasy, not for things like what is it that a lot of I noticed some Iron Agers pushing was Legends and Lattes. They genuinely pushed it forward. It didn't catch on. it caught on with the left. But the thing is, Tolkien and Howard's vision is one of recovery from total collapse to an extent, where, you know, these men of strong faith and valor and good deeds and whatnot, basically strong men make good times, and hard men had made weak or bad times
Weak
or whatever.
men had made hard times.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And I think that's the whole idea. Although, arguably, I think Isaac, imaginative and wise as he is, Isaac Young, found one potential, rediscovered, or sort of, for his books, one potential method of getting indie fiction out to the youngsters, and that's through audio book series, or in radio dramas, releasing it like once a week online.
Yes,
on
yes, I do.
No,
think
he's
that's
sticking
an
to
option.
YouTube. He's sticking to YouTube. I think, you know, put it on YouTube, put it on Spotify, put it on Substack, put it everywhere. But I do think, for Dave, for your
I'm actually planning on pursuing that. I'm planning on pursuing the exact model myself.
Oh, you can use
Yeah,
11
same.
Labs for voiceovers if you want too.
What?
11 Labs AI voiceovers, do the whole recording yourself.
Well,
that'd be helpful.
I've got a friend of mine, my friend Heavy, talked about Substack, and I've shared some of his stories that he's read on his channel. He got a pretty good recording setup done for himself in the last few months, and so sometime soon I'm going through them and editing all my Pearl Divers adventures to get them basically to the point of being publish ready. The first thing I'm going to do with them, hand them over to him, partly because the main character in that was originally one of his characters.
Huh.
So who better to have read them than him?
I'll be honest, I'm struggling to find someone to do it, so I'm basically probably going to...
There is a service you can look into that I've kind of been researching. They've kind of made a little bit of a name for themselves on YouTube by reading old pulp stories, a lot of Howard stuff.
Huh.
Check out Audiobookie. They'll do like up to 10-hour recordings, where normally a lot of the audiobook stuff costs like thousands of dollars. They'll do $500 for a pretty good quality 10-hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I would say
I'll have to look at them.
So I've actually done a little bit of like radio show before of editing. I've actually found 11 Labs to be very good. If you want to use an AI system for this, 11 Labs would do the job. Especially if you want to do like different voices, there's options for various, in the premium version, which is not very, there's options for various 11 Labs voiceovers. And
I'll probably end up asking for both links from both you gentlemen. So, and because ultimately, I prefer to have actual living people do the voices. But I do think it'd be worth experimenting with the other route for at least one book or something and seeing how that goes. But I think, though, that for your Gen Zoomer friends, Dave, for those who struggle to read, maybe it might be good to hand them podcasts of Yoshikawa Eiji or Tolkien or the Iliad and whatnot. Yeah. And I myself am planning to sit down and try listening while I write to maybe I'll just listen to an audiobook rendition of some classic stuff, because I'm reading it, but I also like to occasionally try. For me, it's a different experience. You know, like I will read it on my own, even if I listen to it as an audiobook. When I'm next on the road, I'll be cracking it open to read it. So it's not a replacement. It's more like listening to something in the background while writing. So I'll probably end up cracking open the Odyssey as an audiobook, or Comte de Monte Cristo, and even as I'm reading it, because why not? And I think, though, that there's a lot of potential in the radio drama approach, but I think that now, in Isaac's case, to my knowledge, he's admitted he's going to abandon the written approach, publishing it really as a novel, because he just doesn't see the point or the profit. But the trouble is, I think that that's the wrong attitude to take, that it's, you know, there's no point in the written version, when I think that the written version is the point, and the audio narration and drama is a tool to draw people towards the printed version. At least that's how I look at a lot of these different things, like the radio drama approach, or the I don't know, even video games. I look as a tool, you know, as an extension of sorts of literature. Although that said, my favorite games are stuff like Dragon Age 2, King's Quest. These things feel like novels, and even Valkyr Profile feels like an anthology series. So, which Crown of Blood was very much modeled in a way stylistically after that. So,
that does put to mind. I have to ask Frank yourself. Have you looked at Cloud Obscure Expedition 33 yet?
I want to.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So,
what did you say?
So I picked it up recently. I'm only a little ways into it, but I've been very impressed with it so far. But Joe, I think you would be very much. There is a new classic turn-based style RPG out, released by a group of people that used to work for Ubisoft.
A tiny little indie crew.
Yeah, little indie crew. It's called Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Absolutely oozing French culture, French style, wonderfully in-depth story. It's the type of thing that I really feel like would be pretty much right up your alley.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33?
Expedition 33. Yes.
Okay. Cyanfall Interactive.
Yeah. Brand new studio. Game's only $50. It's a good game.
Wow.
I've heard it's
yeah. I've been quite enjoying it. Kind of mixes classic turn-based RPG stuff with kind of, some Dark Souls mechanics, dodging and parrying your enemy, things like that. Well acted, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous visual style made by a crew of 6 people.
Yep.
Okay, so it's taking place in a kind of La Belle Epoque. Okay, so around 1871 style story.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
One book that I would recommend, or a book series that I would recommend, given that you were discussing Japan, the West, as again something that's sort of a pre-shock to this future mythic or science mythic. That's a good title for the genre, science mythic. The Legend of Galactic Heroes.
Oh yeah,
I've got several heroes.
Yeah, I've got several people who've recommended it to me.
That, I'd say, is another one of those books that isn't quite mythic. It isn't quite science fiction. It isn't quite any other, it leans into science fiction, but it's definitely something a little bit different. And I think that Legend of Galactic Heroes is definitely take a look at, because it also discusses, it effectively gets to contrast and compare monarchic feudal system to the equivalent of a modern dysfunctional republic. It's really interesting.
Check that one out.
Yeah, there's 3 books that are translated in English. There's way more than 3 books, but I've only read the 3 that I can.
I'll be honest. I've had about 2-3 people in the past week or two recommend it.
Okay, and they're right.
Well,
I guess I have to.
That's telling.
Yeah, it's a little funny because I've got my oldest brother who a few months ago said, you have to read this or watch the anime, and then Black Knight ends up doing the same thing, then someone else, and now Copernican's recommending it. I guess I have to.
I haven't seen the anime, but I would like to watch the.
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised that Black Knight, his work is very much.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that it falls under science?
I don't know enough of it. Oh, okay. Well, if Dave says so, it must be so.
I don't know about that, but
I feel like it's on the edge of being science. Same way, Battlestar Galactica is on the edge of being science-fic. It's clearly aiming to create something new. It just doesn't quite have the perspective to get all the way.
Yeah, it wants to basically present mythology in the style, the trapping, the style, the trappings of the ideas of science fiction. It wants to marry the ideas.
Yeah.
Many others that I know that kind of do that same sort of thing. And the one that keeps coming to mind, but I don't think it's a very good Empire Hunter D. And I don't think it's a very good example of it because the science fiction.
No, it isn't. That's really an urban fantasy.
Yeah,
almost.
It's just tacked on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it has
science
to be front and center.
Just tacked on.
There's a few of them that again are it's a genre that clearly is trying to be built. And I think that this is one reason I kind of like the Strugatsky novels, if you're familiar with any of his work.
No.
Okay, they did Roadside Pick, which was later adapted into a video game called Stalker.
Oh, I'm familiar with the Stalker game.
Yeah, so that's based on a novel from the 70s in the Soviet Union called Roadside Picnic. And I would argue that Soviet fiction is also its own genre.
Oh, very much.
If you've also played another great Soviet fiction is Pathologic 2, if you've ever heard of that one, or Pathologic, the original.
I believe I've heard of the games, but I've never played those ones.
It's really, I would describe Soviet fiction as the opposite of urban fantasy. It's where the fantastical elements are merged with the mundane bureaucratic elements, and so it's really hard to tell where one began, the other end.
Yeah, very, very, very fitting. Very fitting for the Soviets.
It's very fitting for
Yeah.
Soviets. And so I think in the way that Soviet fiction sort of evolved into existence under specific social pressures, I think that the science mythic genre is starting to emerge, and that once we get some like core literature in that genre out, we're going to see a new evolution sort of in literature based on that. I hope so, because literature really needs a shake-up, and I think the development of a new mythic form of literature would be the place to do it. Because that's what Tolkien did. That's how he created the fantasy genre. He did a bunch of stuff that no one had ever really done before in terms of world building and history and language. And I think that in creating something like science mythic as a genre, you're going to see sort of throwbacks to Gilgamesh, but in a very different context.
Well, I'll only comment that I think that with what Tolkien did was, originally I thought he did invent the genre, but I've come under the impression more like he kind of brought into the modern world.
I'd argue that he unified the genre.
That's a good term. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. I stand corrected. Very good.
Well, I mean, I said it wrong. I was being hyperbolic, but yeah, he unified the genre that we now call modern fantasy.
Yeah, and it's actually a how do I put it? It's a interesting thing that, like just as a lot of moderns say, there's no great men of history. It's movements and crap like that. But with and they love to propound this also about literature. But Tolkien is a great man of literature in that he, unified the genre, redefined literature, and proved that deep within people there's a hunger for what, for the pre-modern. And this is something that, on a cultural level, I think is very important to take note of, because the moderns, the modernists don't want, you're supposed to be content with the watered down soy fantasy, not the sort of mythological epic, I think is what you called it, Copernican earlier. That he helped push forward. And what I find really funny is that Howard's uber mensch type grand epic as well is just so offensive to them. I've had to sit through several classes where back in college, when my female English professors would just rage about Howard and how sexist he was and how racist or whatever. And ironically, it had the reverse effect. That's how I kind of got curious about Howard at one point, because I was like, why are you ranting and raving about him and saying it's forbidden? Well, I should not read it. I cannot read it. But you're championing Game of Thrones, which has all that stuff that you claim you hate. I don't get it.
Yeah,
so years later, that's how
it says something different than Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones exists on behalf of nihilism, which is why I can't finish the last book, because there's only one way the book can end.
Just kill everyone.
That is how the book has to end. The book has to end with the victory of the night, and the complete destruction of all the kings of Westeros, because they've fallen in nihilism and petty hedonistic engagement. That's how it has to end, based on all the thematics he's been building through his series. That's how Game of Thrones has to end. And he doesn't want to end it that way, so he can't finish the last book.
And the only thing, and the only thing that could save Westeros would be Conan, the Cimmerian.
Yeah.
Actually, pretty much, yeah. You would need a figure like that. You would need somebody who had the strength to bring people together to basically drive out.
Not just the physical strength, but the moral conviction that what I'm doing might not have a point, but it is right. Because that's something that all the characters in Game of Thrones basically lack, is they lack moral
of course,
that what they're doing is right. You have the Kingslayer, whose whole character arc is defined by was breaking my vows to kill the king the right thing to do.
Yeah, and he lacks all moral conviction. And the thing about a great man of history is they always have a great deal of moral conviction about themselves. And the thing with literature is, I would argue there are great authors who unify, redefine genres and whatnot. And we've had a lot of slop writers for the past 30 years. And we've been told they're great, but what we're finding is they're not. And Tolkien, in many ways, was a truly great author who changed I'd say, the entire cultural landscape and whatnot, especially for the Anglosphere. Same with Howard.
Yeah.
These two men just redefined literature. But the thing is, we're not supposed to like them. We're supposed to look to.
I mean, please continue.
I was going to say we're supposed to look to like The Great Gatsby, that writer. I always forget his name. We're supposed to look to Dostoevsky, T.S. Eliot, and all of them. And a lot of them are really good writers, but they didn't redefine fiction itself. They didn't. And like I'm constantly told, what is it? That Emma book, I think it is the greatest book ever written. But it's a slog to get through, and I still haven't made it my way through the whole thing. And like I ask when I go out on the streets and I ask, do you know who T.S. Eliot is? Most people look at me blankly. And I've done that experiment in Japan, France, both parts of Canada. Actually, all three parts, because the Maritimes are their own thing almost. I've been to the US and I've asked, and it's like, it's just a blank look. Whereas you ask them, who is, Lord of the Rings? Everybody immediately goes, oh, yeah, I know that. So it really did redefine fiction and culture. And the problem is we have had academics for 100 years telling us, no, what you like, like Lord of the Rings, Conan, even Sherlock Holmes, that's not good fiction. That's not great stuff. That's terrible. What you need to like is Crime and Punishment, is Emma, is The Great Gatsby, is Mansfield Park. You must like these books. You are not permitted to like Lord of the Rings, Conan, Shakespeare, whatever. Well, you can like Shakespeare to a point, but not too much. But the problem is, I think for the most part, tastes are objective and eternal. People would rather read Gilgamesh, would rather read Tolkien, would rather read that stuff every time. And the problem is, it's because it's so much deeper. It's so much, because like it tackles, like for example, I really like Brothers Karamazov. And, but the themes in there are also kind of reflected in Lord of the Rings. The themes in The Great Gatsby, it's about a bunch of hedonists getting themselves killed and otherwise screwed over. But like, I mean,
that's
like,
part of those are the themes of great books, though. I mean, it's part of the human condition that a lot of these authors tap into is nihilists and hedonists and materialists have a tendency to get screwed over and over and over, and people of character with higher ideals build civilizations. And that's basically what all of these go over every time. Even the Bible talks about it. It's like it's just an aspect of the human condition. We, for some reason, are very stubborn about learning.
Yeah, and I was going to say, but a lot of that we can see in these grander epics like Alex Dumas' Trois Mousquetaires or Comte de Monte Cristo. You see these themes, but you also see more. You get action, you get love, you get all this other stuff. Although that being said, I'll come out of the gate and say, although my favorite Dickens book, and he is literary, is The Christmas Carol, which is kind of fantastical and horror-esque, I have to admit, I really do like Great Expectations. I really love the book, but I really love that story. And so when I write those anti-literary essays, I haven't yet posted the monthly podcast, but for my Substack, but like one thing I do tell, I did say to Daniel is I really do like a lot of these books, but I have to admit, like, you know what I mean? Like they just don't stick with people. They just don't stick in the culture. You know what I mean? Like most people don't read this stuff and they don't want to. And so in a way, it's like it's dead on arrival. And I may love Great Expectation. It's a book I absolutely love. I really love that book. And I love almost every movie adaptation. But in particular, the Ethan Hawke one, I really love this story. Mm-hmm. But like I'll go around and I'll say, well, it's one of my favorite movies. It's one of my favorite books. Okay, what's it about? You don't know Great Expectation? Should I? And like, I don't have an answer. I never have an answer. I've even talked to professors.
Yes, they should, but
yeah. But the trouble is people aren't drawn to it. Whereas when I ask them, like, okay, have you read Lord of the Rings? Everybody always has an answer, yes or no, but they know the story. So it's just one of those things where it's like there's something that Musashi once said: you have to lean into the truth, otherwise it'll break you. And we have to lean into the truth and recognize currently the biggest genres are like fantasy, sci-fi, horror. And this is real fiction. This is the stuff people genuinely care about. They don't care about literary, academic prattle and whatnot. They want, meats and potatoes. They don't want, you know what I mean? Like sugary sweet stuff that's not good for you and that doesn't taste great. Although I think Great Expectation, for example, tastes great, but I'm the target audience with that. And I have had people say, you're clearly not the target audience, or you're protesting too much. But it's just I'm saying as a fact, like, you know what I mean? Like, I can write essays on certain topics, but what gets the most traction are the fantasy fiction analysis or the Dracula book analysis. This gets much more traction. You know what I mean? A lot of other stuff. So, you know, and on YouTube, I did end up at one point trying a bit of discussion of literary stuff. It just, like, I can't get it to stick. I can't get like, I've got the raw data, and, you know, polling data, official polling data shows people are more familiar with these grand sweeping epics than they are, like, how is it that people remember the Troy movie so well rather than, I don't know, an adaptation of Great Expectation? Well, you know, people care a lot about Achilles and Hector and whatnot. That and Helen Kruger, I think was hot in that movie.
Well, we can sort of see this even mirrored a little bit on Substack with one person that all three of us knows to a degree. Alexander Constantine has admitted, to me personally, he's admitted the fact that, like, you know, he used to write that stuff. He's never liked it as much as he likes his literary stuff. But he chose to write literary with the knowledge that that's not his market.
It's hard.
Right, well, yeah, all right. But if you want marketable fantasy, we need to bring it up. And we need to bring up the female gooner.
Yeah.
Like, you want to know this is why
time.
taking fantasy as a genre is because of the female gooner. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Oh, and that problem extends so much further than fantasy.
It's so bad.
But the solution is just to write more gore books. I'm joking. But
I'll call up James Desborough. Man, we need more tales of gore. You're working on that, right?
But yeah, it's like the female gooner thing is a problem. I have no idea what, like, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like,
it is a problem, though. We can all accept that it's a problem.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And in research, it's the same laid out in the exact same one, different styles of books instead of fantasy. It was whatever was contemporary to that time. But you had so many female authors at the time writing under male pen names back then, but it's the exact same sort of raunchy stuff.
I know, but
there's almost no difference. But go the way of the dinosaur. Go back into the closet with that for a little while.
So, like, maybe the Taliban was onto something. They talked about, like, learning to read being restricted.
Maybe
at least that's what Lord Miles thinks. Have you guys been following?
What's that line from Borat? How's that line from Borat go? Oh, we say that to give a woman power is like giving a gun to a monkey.
But like, it is an actual issue because the modern fan into, like,
a slog.
If you want it to be easy to market, just make it gooner trash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if you want it to be,
you've got
I was going to basically repeat what you said. That is how it works.
Yeah, you've got also this problem hits close stuff for me because, what corner of the fantasy genre one? That's the worst effect. It's the dark fan because they always want this dark and edgy in time
and boring.
And you know, the whole point of the dark and brooding and edgy stuff was to highlight the hopeful, was to make that feel more impactful when the not to make the porn exciting.
Exactly. Like, the exciting part about the Solomon Kane and even Conan and Kull stories is when you get that moment of relief, it's like, how do I put it? There's a sense of relief and joy, and you just want to laugh because, you know, it's been earned. And it's something which the problem is the Gooners have kind of wrecked.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And they're a corruptive force. And now that they're done with romantasy, they're wanting to get rid of it. But the funny thing is romantasy can now be taken up by the right wing. And I think that they're kind of done with sword and sorcery at this point. They're wandering on to, what is it, like cozy fantasy or sci-fi or something? And
yeah, they're wandering over to cozy fantasy.
Okay. Well, if we can contain them in lit RPG for a while, we can clear up the genre. Okay. Yeah. Because lit RPG was always lunar trash. I'm joking. I'm joking to the lit RPG fans we have. I'm joking. But no, actually, lit RPG was always its own thing, and I never fully got it, but I kind of had some mad respect for the fan base, but because they were passionate, and I respected that. But the Gooners are now going there, and I'm confused as to what could possibly draw them there. But on the other hand, what could possibly have drawn them to dark fantasy? Well, it's probably the half-naked Conan.
That would be it. Yeah, that would be the thing.
Yeah. But what I was going to say, though, with Cozy is that I'm curious about once the current crop of projects I'm done with are done, I really want to try out Cozy Fantasy. That'll be as close as I'll get to something like Great Expectation or something, and just or like literary stuff. Like I said, I know that stuff. I've had to read it in university. I have a fondness, but fondness doesn't mean I have to be blind to reality. But I'm really wanting to write a Cobalt literary style Cozy fantasy novel about just like winning the wills or something, and where they're building like a church inside a mountain, and I think that'd be the funnest thing to write about.
That would be cool.
Yeah, right. Like basically following like some rando like what is it, like some random guy who is like a smoker and likes his beer, and him and the villagers have to get together and build up a church, and you got the Baron outside trying to obstruct without seeming to obstruct, and just kind of having this little bit of fun. Cam Carroll actually was like, yeah, okay, but I don't think I'd be able to get into it without a dragon or something. Okay, I could throw a dragon at the end, but I want for the most part to just be literary, like cozy, and just day-to-day
that sounds
fun
cool.
Stuff. Yeah, and
I like that idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I get it sort of sounds like you could make the argument that I actually tried writing some cozy fantasy with Castle on the Hill,
which I can't wait to read.
I need to finish. I need to get back to that. The Jarl's Son. That's going to be the next big project.
Good. See, you're leading the charge on more than one subgenre.
Yeah, my first book, or at least the first book that I'm likely to publish, is probably Soviet. So we'll see how that goes.
Should go well.
Well, we'll see. It might. You guys have recommendations, by the way, on like how to publish? Because I'd rather work with the publishing and try and do it publishing. I don't have a big enough stack to justify 10,000 people buying a book.
Well, okay. I know one publisher, but it usually takes them a year to like 9 months to work through their, because they tend to pick up 40 books, then they slowly publish each one like 2 or 3 at a time or 5 at a time. And it takes them like 8 to 9 months, but they want the completed manuscript in front of them before they'll accept it. Now, it's Enroute Media, and they're a Catholic, small indie publisher. I have to admit, I am keen to work with a few indie publishers here and there, if only to, I guess, diversify things. I don't mind indie publishing a few books, but I also want to have some indie stuff. So I definitely hear you, Copernican. I would say the Enroute would work if you're a Christian. I mean, and
my pro pick, right?
Yeah, you definitely are. So that's where you're probably acceptable in their eyes. And they'll they also have a radio they own. They have a podcast channel. They have, I think, a YouTube channel, and they've got their own, but they want you to come up with a marketing plan, and they won't accept you if you don't come up with your own solid marketing plan. And that's something which, well, I'll be honest, indie or not, the key to actually getting good sales, in my experience, has been in person, but going to convention and putting down money for the table and then selling dozens of copies. Even at a small one, I'll say, don't bring only a dozen. I brought about a dozen and I ran out. And then nobody was interested because they come for the books. They don't come for, and but I sold out, so that was good. And but I'd say I do have the data for how to prepare for a larger convention with 10 to 30,000 people. Because I spent the time after we sold out just asking questions and getting information from others. And they gave me a lot of data and feedback and experiences and whatnot. So conventions would be the way to go for selling your book. But those, you need to prepare for weeks in advance and whatnot. But as far as actually getting the book out, I'd say Brian Juck had a great marketing plan, which is to say, go to children's hospitals and to hospitals for blind kids and also women's shelters. You spread your books out to those places and marketing.
That's actually,
and there's also
because if they don't have
giving it out.
read it.
Yeah, and it gets you a good positive rep. That and building up solid platforms and whatnot, which I know you already have.
It's not that solid. It's like 1,000 subs, but
that's. Oh, I thought you had more than that.
A little bit more, but I only have like.
Oh, I meant on YouTube.
I don't have a YouTube under Copernican.
Okay, well, 1,000 subs is still pretty solid. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like, the thing is, you've got to be kind of part of the community and constantly remind people that you're an author. So in that regard, it's really quite useful. Like, I tend to hand out to just about anyone and everyone I know a copy of a book, a copy of that book, and whatnot. And even if it's for free, I count it as a sale because then they share it with their friends and whatnot.
I could also bug Alexander Svetsky. I reviewed one of his books at his request recently, and so he owes me at least a marketing support. I hope. I hope you do. Yeah. If he's listening, I hope you're willing to assist me in marketing someday for one of my publications. But
yep. Yeah, so like I said, onto it, you're going to need a marketing plan. Just keep it simple, though. They want a simple one and like a 3-paragraph thing, and that'll get you in through the door, I think. But you're basically supposed to accept that it's going to take a little bit of time before they finally publish and print it, because it's one of those things which takes a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
And I tried asking I tried at one point asking them, where is it at? Just in confusion. And that got them a little mad at me. So I had to apologize at one point. So don't rush them. They'll get a little mad. But when it comes to actual other publishers, currently I'm still looking at one for dark fantasy, sword and sorcery.
I swear there was a publisher that recently opened in the UK that's dedicated to like male authors.
Yeah, that guy's
name was.
Let me look it up.
Let's see. I'm seeing articles about how they're
Conduit Books,
but overlooked
it. The publishing. It's founded by UK novelist and critic Jude Cook, and his publishing house is Conduit Books.
Conduit.
But he's only accepting literary fiction and memoirs by men right now.
I mean,
but
mine actually
does
falls
hope
under.
If he's successful,
I'd argue. I can argue literary that Soviet fiction can be a subgenre of literary. So I think my book would fall under literary.
Then he's your man. Yeah, that works. I doubt anything I do could count. So yeah, Conduit fiction Conduit Books. I mean, seems to be your.
Yeah, I'll try and hook up with them. Hopefully, I can finish the 30,000 to 60,000 words here soon. Be done. I've needed to get this one out for a while. Yeah, I just want to finish it, man.
Yeah.
So tired of
that. First dropped out, you take a little bit of a break, and that's when revision and editing begins.
I took a little bit of a break for 2 years after I finished the first 30,000. I just finished the second 30,000 words, and I'd rather get it done sooner than in 2 years. I really like it.
Yeah.
I like it. When you're writing a book and you put it down for a long time, like 2 years, and then you go back and look at it and you read through like the first couple of pages, and your thoughts are either going to be, this is trash and I need to fix it, or this is actually way better than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I had that experience with a few books. I remember one of them. Which one was it? It was Khaled Bolg. I came back to it and I went, oh my gosh, this is unreadable trash. I hate this thing. Burn it. But then I thought, well, it's already finished. I might as well get it edited and and then of course I look at the improvements Daniel Riley made and I went, oh, okay, I guess it's passable now. But then with Gemstone, I put that down for Remus and Gwilherm. I remember putting it down in 2020 or 2021, and it's like, this won't be good. And then I go back and I'm editing it for Substack, and I'm going, actually, this is way better than I thought it was. Cool.
Yeah.
And Gemstone, of course, I put down, and I went, I wonder if it's trash. Pick it back up to, dust it off, and I actually really like it, especially the songs and having a nice damsel princess who sometimes breaks into song is something I really enjoyed, and I want to work again with that because I have to admit I really like that character. What?
That's a good idea. I like the It's just wholesome.
Well, of the damsel.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the damsel breaking into song and whatnot, because at first she sings to ridicule her savior, and then later she's singing praise to him and singing also of love song of whatnot. She's kind of doing the romancing, and I have to admit, she's probably become one of my favorite characters in the book. It's just I love the fact that she sings, and in volume 2 and 3 she was not supposed to be in there for too long, and I keep squeezing her back in because it's just her singing I love characters that sing now. I didn't used to, but now I can't.
I think
if the book doesn't have a song, yeah. If the book doesn't have a character breaking a song, at least for my writing, I can't stand writing it. It's like, I'm writing. The characters didn't break in a song. Fuck them. I hate them. But then, but with other authors, it's like, I'm like, I understand why they don't have a character breaking a song. I don't mind it. It's just my own books. I'm like, why would anyone want to read my books if no one's breaking a And it's just one of those things where I, as the author, can't stand my own writing if someone's not singing at some point, at least once every chapter or 5. And
definitely not appropriate.
I don't know
for
if
my
that's
first
odd.
for my first publication. It's this one, but it might be appropriate in some other books.
It wouldn't be. Yeah, you could save it for another.
The characters are far
story.
too much of nihilism in this book for anything like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's basically Soviet fiction, so of course. And yeah, but I wonder if Castle on the Hill has any songs.
It does. I posted one of them. So the last chapter that I posted, which was chapter 6, Katrine, Paul, and the huntsman in red come up to a stranger on the trail who's singing a Riveran work song. And I actually posted the entire song in its own separate post, so I can actually grab it for you, drop it.
Cool.
Yeah, the Black Knight was very happy when I did.
Oh yeah, of course.
He loved.
That just makes me want to write. Yeah, that just makes me want to get back to writing the Draconiciad.
There we go. Dropped it.
Ooh, I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, no, that story. One of the things that was fun with that particular story is, for one, I mean, it's not as dark and pulpy as the stuff that I usually write, which is kind of a challenge in some ways, having to pull back on some of that. But the fun thing is that's kind of the story that sort of secretly reveals that all the different stories that I've been writing, basically all in the same world. It's like they don't necessarily seem like it. They might not be directly related to each other, but that's the one that kind of, first shone the spotlight on that fact. Like, hey, these nations that I keep name dropping across all my little stories. Yeah, this one actually takes place in one and references the other nation that takes place in my other 2.
Let's see. We've been running.
Well,
we've been running for close to 2 hours now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll just comment on Dave's thing real quick.
We should consider wrapping it up. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, be a good idea.
Yeah. I have to do up the Sword and Saturday post and eat, but probably in that order. But what I was going to say is I've talked a lot with Thérèse Judena and Red Oscar and, Catherine Elaine. It seems like a lot of us fantasy authors on Substack, all of our stories operate within the same world for the most, like our own individual worlds. And that's something I really find kind of cool because, all my stories are in the same world and you can kind of tell, but because it's all kind of similar. Whereas Thérèse, yourself, Dave, and Red Oscar and others, you might write very different kinds of fantasy fiction and it's all in the same world. And I find that just fascinating. Whereas mine is all like epic poems or like the more epic side of things, rarely ever treading into other stuff, which is why I want to do cozy because it's very different.
Cozy does feel like it'd be a good fit for your writing style, like that, other than mythic and epic stuff. Yeah, that one feels like a really good.
Honestly, I don't want a dragon at the end. I want there to be like you're talking about that book of like just building a church in a mountain, and there being like back and forth drama. This is what I would do: is I wouldn't put a dragon in. I would put at sort of the conclusion of the book, like immediately before or immediately after somebody in the story tells a story about a dragon. attacking.
Well, there is an opening for that.
You don't even need to actually have a dragon at the end of the book with the characters we've been following. You could have a character we've been following discuss like a past event or tell a mythology about a dragon that attacked said kingdom. I think that might be a clever way to end it and still have an action ending.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is though that there is that opening in my stories because I have done that before, and something like it, and I've got quite a few. I do have several, and because I'm planning, it's going to be in Gallia. I have several stories where in the mythic past of various points, where a king or a knight would go out and slay a dragon, or like a dragon would come to the rescue of a knight. So I've got those sort of things baked into the crust of the story. So it is a very strong possibility, and it would make a lot of sense.
All right. Well, it's your book. You do what you want, but
no, I like that idea.
Ideas.
I like that idea. That sounds a lot more appealing to me.
Because I really want a cozy, like a cozy fan book.
Same.
Anyway. So we'll do final remarks here, and we all have to take off because we all have business.
Yep.
So
we'll let Dave go first.
Oh, Dave, you go first.
All right. I guess I'll just do a fairly typical sign off here. So just as a reminder, I am Dave S. Brandt, also known as the man behind the screen. You can find me on Substack, probably where you're listening, so you've probably already found me. I write lots of fantasy fiction, essays about fantasy fiction, usually dark fantasy or pulp adventure related. I currently have one book out available for publication we can find on Amazon titled Its Shadow, and I've been working sequel, The Jarl's Son, which I hope I will be able to this year, but if not, probably next year, based on how the pace has been going with that. Other than that, I usually write one story or part of a chapter every week on my Substack, Tales of in Triumph. Lots of pulp adventure inspired stories. So if that kind of fiction is your thing, you're probably gonna and on top of that, I guess the main thing is hosting Sword and Saturdays alongside Joe of the Brothers Krynn here, the Warrior Wednesdays as well. Really about
Couldn't do it without
all
you.
I've got.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. We all really appreciate it, and you know a lot about this material more than I do for sure. So.
It's a pleasure to be.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do this. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again, and whatnot. This was fun.
Absolutely.
And as for myself, I'm from Brothers Krynn, where I'm primarily on Substack alongside Dave, running the 2 fantasy events, which honestly couldn't be done without him. He contributes that much, and I tend to write all sorts of essays on any topic that's fictional and philosophical at this point. And I also tend to release 3 times a week. Hopefully I'll soon have 4 times a week because I want to re-release some old French stories on the new newsletter. That's for purely French stuff. So nothing but fantasy stories. And hopefully I'll soon also have some audio narrated books out on Substack as well, so that people can also have some good videos to listen to as they read or write or something.
Great, thank you. And I'm Copernican. I'm hoping to, at some point here this year, start releasing chapters or sub-chapters from my book, my Substack under the fiction tag, which is currently empty. Otherwise, you can get in touch with me for reviews of fiction, science fiction, and of course, a whole lot of discussions of politics and international diplomacy, because I have a broad set of interests. So I've got my Substack is too full of nonsense. I've got too many different directions I'm going, to be honest. But if you want a
broad set of interests, but it's backed up with a broad base of knowledge.
That's true. If anybody's interested in reviewing in any of the book reviews I put out, I try to put out a book review every month on average. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. And they get the worst performance out of anything on my Substack. So if anybody's interested, feel free to sign up and just read the book reviews. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Dibs. Crown of Blood has dibs on the next one.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yep.